Welcome to Attention Needed, where we dive deep into the world of artificial intelligence and its implications for our future. I'm Victor Bian, Chief Operating Officer of Hydrex AI and host of this show. And today we're excited to launch this new podcast. We're starting this podcast to make sense of the rapid advancements in artificial intelligence that are reshaping our world. Generative AI has unlocked unprecedented creativity and efficiency, but it also raises important questions about safety and security. Our goal is to explore these developments, discuss the challenges, and provide insights into how AI can be harnessed responsibly. We're here to foster a deeper understanding of AI's impact and to engage in conversations that help guide its future for the benefit of all. For our first episode, we're thrilled to welcome an esteemed guest who is at the forefront of building and facilitating an open source community for generative AI. Joe Spisak, Director of PM for Generative AI at Meta, where he leads Llama and third-party ecosystem efforts. Joe is the co-founder of the AI Alliance, a new organization co-launched by IBM and Meta that promotes open, safe, and responsible AI. He also chairs the Safety and Security Workgroup. He spent the last decade in AI, leading products at PyTorch and working on initiatives that span protein folding and AI math, many of which have spun out from Meta into their own startups. In this episode, we'll be discussing a variety of topics, including the AI Alliance, the role of open source, the competition at the state-of-the-art frontier models, as well as the importance of addressing safety and security challenges. Hope you enjoy it.
Hey, Joe. Thank you so much for being with me today on the podcast, and especially the very first episode. And let's talk about AI Alliance first. As the co-founder of AI Alliance, and also as the person who support and co-chair as the AI Safety and Security Working Group, and also as the senior lead in this Gen AI space at Meta. So I want to ask you, could you share some information about what is the AI Alliance? Who is this for? And also from your point of view, what motivated you to start this collaboration?
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. This is fun. It's great to connect, and your mission really resonates with me. So I'm excited to chat. Yeah, the AI Alliance. I think for folks that have been in this space, I guess for a while, like myself, I think we've been talking about open science and open source and kind of building ecosystems and communities around technology. And I think with this new generative AI era that we're in, it's important, I think, to have a lot of others involved and really build, these ecosystems around, things like being open and open source models and just general open source technology. I think that standards in the space, for the longest time have continued to be very much like de facto standards versus the traditional standards approach that other industries take. And but given the stakes that are involved, just given how important this technology is to, frankly, everyone on the planet, it was really, really important for us to bring others with us, to collaborate deeply, to focus on trust and safety, where I spend, some of my time or as much time as I possibly can, because these are areas where they're not, in my opinion, not there to be competed on. Like, we should be collaborating on trust and safety, and not safety should never be something that we compete on. And I felt very strongly that an alliance of this scale was like something that was needed. And and we're really excited to bring it together. I think we have over 130 members at this point, which is insane. After 1 year, so we're definitely doing something right, which is great. We're definitely still very much in the early days, but it's a very positive sign.
Definitely. That is fantastic for sure. And we all know that open source is one of the key things in the alliance, and also open source is one of the key pieces in the Gen AI as a wave or as a field, right? And speaking of that, we all know that it takes a lot of resources and bandwidth to build the SOTA, the state-of-the-art foundation models. And also, I think there's the equal amount of the resources and the courage to open source them for sure. And also at the same time, there are so many closed ones outside where people can directly use as a service or a product. So question is why does Meta do so?
Yeah, I've never heard the word courage in open source models in the same sentence like that before, but it's totally true. I think Meta is a really interesting company in that our business model doesn't require us to monetize like a lot of our technology directly. And so, and I think also like couple that with the fact that like a lot of the heritage and kind of the history of a lot of the AI work, the company has been academic, like folks like Joel Pignot or Jan LeCun who've come from kind of academic backgrounds and research backgrounds. I also think there's just like there's um, a DNA at Meta in open source. I think it's really refreshing. I think that's one of the reasons I came here like all those years ago. And whether it's React, whether it's PyTorch, whether it's the 1,000 projects that Fair has released and all the research that they publish, I think there's just this general mindset here that um, it's what we're going to do is likely going to be released in the open, or we'll be open sourcing it. It's just really a matter of like how and what are really how do we take it to market, or who do we partner with, or what are our goals. And but like there's this underlying assumption for a lot of things that we do that we are going to release the technology and be transparent about it, which is really cool. I think what you allude to is like when you get into generative AI and LLMs, like the stakes definitely go up,
Right.
the costs definitely go up. The stakes are definitely high. There's real risks with this technology. Some of it's a little bit overblown. Some of it is not. Um, the cost certainly is, to train a model of say the 4 or 5B scale was definitely not cheap. I can't say the number, but it was very, it was not definitely cheap. To train that model, but training the model is actually relatively not small, but it's really not the whole story. I mean, there's all of obviously the engineering we put into it. There's all of the data processing. There's all of the post training alignment, whether it's SFT and funding annotations, human evals, red teaming. Like it goes on and on and on to kind of develop these things and take them to market. And I think we're one of the few companies I think that can really do that at a scale like maybe no other, because I think it's important for us. We believe anyway. It's important for us that the ecosystem in 2 years, 5 years, 1 year, whatever it is, isn't locked into a closed ecosystem. So we're pushing very hard on being open because we believe it's important for the world, important for us. And so yes, we have to do these things. We have to be the company that's maybe the tip of the spear and investing and able to invest, obviously, to do these things. So yes, we do have the courage. We have had the courage for a long time, and we have a CEO who's fearless, and that definitely helps too.
Yeah, of course, of course. I was from Facebook back to then, and that is so true. And this is definitely a respectful effort, and that definitely enables a lot, especially for the ecosystem or open source community. So at that level, there are so many people who are working on different things as a different players and for different domains. I can make a lot of examples like modeling for sure, open source, closed source, verticals, applications, hardware, agents, so on and so forth. So if I can help set up the context before we have this discussion by giving some examples, of course, OpenAI will come to my mind. They published the ChatGPT o1, which has a lot of good things about multi-step reasoning. And Anthropic just delivered their latest Claude 3.5 new version of the model, which has a bunch of the agentic reasoning capabilities. At the same time, I have to mention Llama, which has published the most recent version of a 3.1 and 3.2. They're super strong in terms of the multilingual support, right? So there are so many things. And of course, I think at this moment, probably we haven't seen, or there's no agreement, or people don't align with in terms of what is the killer app at this moment. And of
Mm.
course, we want one, but people are still working really hard to get there. So, from your opinion, what is the winning formula here for Gen AI to have its killer app moment? Or you think something can be called as a killer app already?
Yeah, I don't know that we've got the killer app. I think we've found ways that the technology is valuable for sure. I think I look at like generative AI. I look at these models as they're non-deterministic. models are autoregressive. They, they're. I think a lot of what we're doing these days is trying to figure out how to manage the outputs of them in a way that, right. So how we define hallucinations, or how we connect these models, to databases, or information outside the model. In the case of like RAG, and I think, I mean, we have internally at Meta, we have something called MetaMate, which is our own internal kind of agent, and you essentially like replace what a wiki was, I guess, right? And you can prompt it, you can and ask it basically anything, and it will go and aggregate a lot of information from different sources across the company. It will look, there are people that use it for their own performance ratings, right? It'll go and look at your GDocs. It'll look at your posts internally, in Workplace. It will look at your, what people have commented about you or about your work, and it'll aggregate that and summarize it and format. And so it's like really helpful, because like it saves you like a lot of time and effort. And like I think wikis are a little bit passe. Like I don't think anyone really wants to like go to a wiki. They just want to like ask a question and have like have the data be presented and have it be accurate and all that good stuff. So I don't think we've found like the sexy killer app yet, for this, but I think with anything where there's like promise in the technology and you continue to like lower the cost of it, and you have at the same time just like the new capabilities that keep coming out, people discover applications. I mean, I think image and video generation are really interesting. I think it's hard to say like, hey, like generating an image from like Midjourney, or even or like XAI or Grok, or these things, like I'm actually able to do something like a truly killer app. But like there are like really interesting things around like commerce, where companies are looking to commerce and fashion and some of these other areas, where there's startups that are again trying to constrain or direct or manage the outputs of these models, and have the model respond in a way that is like faithfully reproduces, say, like an image of your shoe, like, or if you're Nike or someone trying to market your shoes. So I think like for a lot of this, it's like finding ways to kind of build this in an application where it's more deterministic than anything. I do see a ton of promise. I mean, video generation is really, really interesting, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper. I don't know if you saw like some of the work we did. We just released in our movie gen. We haven't open sourced those models, but who knows? But it's like really compelling. I mean, and if you keep lowering the cost of this technology, and it becomes much more approachable and within reach of average developers, they'll find amazing applications, and patterns form, and values created.
Yeah, you're so right. And probably it's too costly for every single person to build their own models, and probably it's not necessary. And at the same time, there are a lot of people that are building the applications or building their products, which is empowered by the Gen AI models. So from a downstream users and builders perspective, so they're building things, they're gonna choose like where I want to build things on top of it. When and why people should choose open source over the closed ones? Of course, there are so many reasons, but from your point of view, like what are those?
Yeah, the open versus closed discussion. I mean, I think there's actually room for both in a lot of ways. I think that, and I mean, it really isn't kind of an either or as well, because I think like once you host an open source model, I mean, sure, I think you have an API, much like OpenAI has an API, or Anthropic has an API. I think what open source gets you though is like that next level of customization, the next level of access, to the weights of themselves. So I can generate logits if I want, for example, in an open source model, which maybe I can't with a closed model. I can do things like I can use those logits for things like distillation, which up until recently, like you couldn't do that, with closed models. I think the other thing that like an open model gets you is the community, right? You get this crazy, wild, innovative, high velocity community around things, and I think that that's something that maybe a closed model maybe doesn't give you is, when people build new tools, or they find new ways to say jailbreak models, or um, there's fine-tuned versions of these models. I mean, if you look at like Hugging Face, I think for Llama models or something like 60,000 fine-tuned models that people upload. Those are only the public ones. There's probably at least that privately hosted. So I think you get a lot of drafting off of like the community, and and you just get a lot more control. So like if I want to, for example, we released the 1 3D models. In fact, yesterday we just released the quantized version of those, and you can like deploy those onto your phone and have like your local agent that is able to summarize or do prompt rewriting or do local rag, or maybe like basically summarize your last 10 messages that maybe are like end-to-end encrypted. Like I can't do that with a closed model. So I think there's like very pragmatic things that you can do with an open model, just because you have full access and full autonomy to do things. Like I can't run a local agent on my Mac with a closed model, whereas like with Llama and Ollama, like I can, and it's super awesome, and it runs really fast. So I think part of it is like philosophical for some people. Some of it is just pragmatic, in that you can only do certain things with and do them only with open models. And the other is like, again, just that velocity of the community, which if you want to draft off that, like it's hard to do that with a closed model.
Yeah, exactly. And especially when someone, if they want to have the full control of the models, that's where they have the better choice. And I think we all, you just mentioned a lot of use cases. And I think this Gen AI stuff is definitely not a bubble. And like a text summarization, text to image generation, video coding pilot, and so on and so forth, right? So when people are getting the values from it, I think people have to realize there are also a bunch of the challenges at the same time. So I think safety and security is one of those. So now probably I want to shift the gear a little bit to talk about the safety and security. So as we know that you co-chair the the AI trust and safety working group at the AI Alliance. And can you tell us like what do you see as the most urgent and the unique safety and security challenges in the GIS space? Why they are very needed and important to be addressed, and what are resources that we have today which are available that people can directly use or leverage?
Yeah. So this is a great question. I look at, even I guess it's been almost exactly a year ago. Something that I helped spearhead here at Meta was our Purple Llama effort, and it's continues, and I view it as essentially an echo of all of the models that we release. We're going to release kind of analogous trust and safety components that go with our models, and we kind of inadvertently started a bit of a trend in terms of like system level components, and that led us to start building things like Llama Stack, and things started to feel much more like a system and an agent, in that case, and especially over the last year. I think safety was really like the first application. We started to think about how do we push safety to a place where it can be much more customizable, much more. So if you want to adapt to your taxonomy, for example, your harm taxonomy, we actually can give you the tools to be able to fine tune and define it yourself, and then have a model that sits outside that you can then orchestrate. So that was something that I pushed on pretty hard a year ago, and it's been pretty successful. I think we've had a lot of adoption. I think when we started AI Alliance, I kind of saw this in parallel, that we as a company only have so much expertise in safety, right? We have a strong team. We have strong red teaming org. We have great folks in safety. We have a lot of, as you know, coming from Facebook, we have a lot of folks that know content moderation and integrity, and so we built on all that experience, over the years that we've had. But we don't know everything. I mean, especially when you start to get into like more of the frontier risks, like the CBRNE challenges or risks. Like we don't have explosive experts at Facebook that I know of. We don't have bioweapon experts. And honestly, while those are like risks that I think we're calling out today, there's a lot of other areas where we just don't know what we don't know. So again, going back to that kind of open approach, one of the reasons I think AI Alliance was so interesting for me is this could be a great place for us to bring together, like folks in academia, for example, or startups or not-for-profits, or folks that have a lot of different perspectives. They might have data, they might have deep domain expertise, and a lot of expertise that frankly doesn't traditionally sit in like big industry. And if you bring those folks together and you give them a common platform and some agency, um, I think they can contribute a lot. Because I look at evaluation, for example. The analog I always picture in my mind is like you're in this pitch black room and every eval is kind of like a flashlight. And you
Yeah.
have this flashlight, you turn it on and you're able to basically see in that particular area, and you can kind of understand what's happening, assuming your eval is relatively good. Um, but you can't see everywhere, right? It doesn't illuminate the entire room. So I need more flashlights. And
Right.
each flashlight is a domain or it's an area that either, tells me, how helpful my model is on some axis, or obviously, or eliminates some risk that we may have. And so my goal is with AI Alliance is to find as many different flashlights as possible
Hmm.
and bring those together so we can see more and understand more about how our models are performing.
That's very cool. That's very cool. Even you said that there are so many things you guys can work on, but I really want to say that I think Meta has been doing a great job in terms of the open source modeling. So from that point of view, if I can focus a little bit on Meta itself, so in many ways, I think that Meta is definitely a unique company. It's not only the model builder that they publish a bunch of the foundational models, but also at the same time, Meta is a very early stage and successful adopters. Like they have a bunch of the products, applications, features, and modules, which are all empowered by Gen AI. And they have billions of users at the same time, right? So we know that the most recent version of the Llama is 3.2. Based on our analysis in-house at HydroX AI, it is one of the, of course, we focus on AI safety and security point of view. It is one of the most powerful and also one of the safest open source models. And even compared with the close ones, I mean, those SOTAs, I mean, it's not far from those competitors. So from that point of view, because you mentioned that there are a lot of things you can work on, like a domain knowledge and those kind of stuff. So can you tell us a little bit more about what actually Meta does from a both technical and the business point of view to introduce such a safe model to the community?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a very unique company. I mean, I think when we were releasing the 405B in July 23rd, I have that date etched in my brain, and I always probably will. I mean, we also released products at the same time. It's kind of like if you think about that analog of say OpenAI or someone else, building and releasing something like ChatGPT, and then also at the same time on the same day, like releasing the model behind it. It's wild, right? And I think it's when you think about it in those terms, it's crazy. Um, so I think safety for us is pretty comprehensive. I think we we have um, we have everyone from, I would say, like deep domain experts in, again, like in content safety, and we partner externally, with experts in safety and red teaming. But it also like starts with data. So and really even before data, it starts with our goals and understanding like how we actually define these risks, how we define thresholds, how we define our taxonomies. Um, we when we're defining, or we're getting ready to train a big foundation model, say like Llama 3. Llama 3 was trained over several months. It was on 16,000 GPUs. It took obviously a while to train, and a lot of compute and a lot of money and a lot of data. um, we, based on our goals that we started with, we looked at, we filtered the data itself. We looked at like PII information. We looked at filtering out like potentially harmful sites that we were pulling data from. So really, like from the day one, kind of looking at the data itself and trying to reduce harms before we even think about training a model. And then once we have a base model in post training, we start to um, we actually start with kind of like the most helpful model we can, and then we start to layer on safety like over time. And so we do lots of rounds of like RLHF and alignment, along with SFT or supervised fine tuning. And so, we're doing like 6, 7 rounds, even potentially more in some cases, of RLHF. And we measure safety, and we bring in humans to eval models at every stage. And so we're constantly understanding like where we are, like how not only how the auto evals are like these kind of standard benchmarks, are trending, but also like, bringing in experts who are red teaming these models or evaluating them and trying to poke and prod and kind of jailbreak them. And so we're constantly getting both, automated results, as well as actual humans, to kind of tell us and give us an understanding, kind of where do our models stand. Um, and so it's a very expensive process, right? It's a very iterative process. It requires a lot of expertise. It requires a lot of money, a lot of annotations, which cost more money, and a lot of compute, because we're running lots of rounds in post training. And then ultimately, we do a lot of also just like dog fooding and evaluation internally. We will run our models in applications, to understand their performance without deploying them. So we kind of have a pretty robust process from really start to finish, from like really defining goals, all the way through to product deployment, or obviously open source. Open source is a one-way door, as you know, so we have to get it right. And I think the last piece is, we'll look at things holistically from the system perspective, and build these guardrails and classifiers, and we keep building more and more over time. So our first release, last year, about a year ago, was the first Llama guard model, which basically was a prompt filter input output. It was English only. It was a 7B model. Over time it's gotten better. It's multilingual. We shrunk it down in this past release. It's now a pruned and quantized 1B model, so it's 500 megs. You can actually run it on your phone along with your other model, which is really cool. You can run it on the server if you want, and it's actually pretty state of the art in terms of how it performs even against content moderation APIs. And then obviously we're looking at other modalities. With this previous release, we had vision models. We want to be able to filter, things like CSAM and other bad things on the inputs of these things, so we can protect the community, protect users. And I think the biggest piece is like, how do you then bring all these together into an application and make it easy as you can for developers to kind of deploy safety? Because ultimately we want safety to be everywhere. We want these components to be used everywhere, but we want the cost of them to be basically asymptotic to zero. And so whether it's like the latency you incur by orchestrating multiple models, or whether it's the cost of the model itself and running them over prompts, and whether it's images or outputs or whatever, you want the cost to be as cheap as possible. And so we're driving the cost down, either through smaller models or quantizing them, or both. And so we kind of think about things literally from the beginning all the way through to what does that full system look like, and we're measuring safety basically every step of the way to understand where we stand.
Yeah, yeah. Those are not definitely not easy, but those are definitely very important work. And one of the main concerns from adopting the Gen AI is safety and security. And by doing so and by enhancing it, I think it would definitely lower the concerns when people are using it. Of course, even before they're deciding are using it, right? And if we go a little beyond, at Hydrox AI, we focus on AI safety and security. But there are so many other things beyond this for sure. And we believe one of those futures is agentic. So, of course, there are some use cases. We can talk about that later. But in your opinion, how should we think about the safety in the agent-driven or agent-oriented world coming in the future?
Yeah, agents are really interesting because they're basically unbounded in a lot of ways, right? If you have a code interpreter, and you're able to execute code, that's a pretty difficult thing to manage. If you can generate images or videos, if you can call, if it has tool use and zero shot, and it's able to search and other capabilities. So they're really they can be in a lot of ways like pretty unbounded and hard to manage. I think what we've started to do is think through some of the key components. Like one of the first areas that we focused on, for example, was coding assistance and cybersecurity. That was an application from the beginning that we wanted to make sure that we focused on. And I would say we're pretty lucky at Meta to have a really strong cybersecurity team that also is, very, very well tuned into Gen AI. The Josh Sachs, who is the tech lead for that, is like one of the few in the space who kind of is incredibly deep in the cybersec side, but also in Gen AI, and it's pretty rare. And so as a result, like the tools and evals that we've released, I think have great empathy or user empathy. And so whether that's, on the kind of evaluation and metric side of things, we've released, I think, 3 rounds at least now of our cybersecurity evaluation. So understanding, everything from like, prompt injection, insecure code generation, these types of things. And then of course, like, once you've measured something, like how do you then like action it? How do you mitigate it? And so we've started to release like prompt guard, and yeah, and some of these like inference time guardrails, uh, for for basically that particular application, which is probably one of the more risky ones. So I think like that's like it's not going to solve all of agents. Not all of agents are coding assistants and code review and cyber type agents, but understanding some of these major applications from the beginning and starting to understand like how to number one, how do you measure the risk? Like if you don't measure the risk, you can't mitigate the risk. And so having really good evals is super important, especially like more dynamic ones, like more like I would say like LMSys is doing, which are really cool. I think that's like, in my opinion, like where they're going is really the future. It's much more dynamic, much more like human like. I think is um, it's interesting. And then how do we then deploy things that are these guardrails and these things that are constantly evolving? Like we need to evolve these in adversarial. A lot of these are adversarial problems, and so we need to be constantly updating them. And that again goes back to like how do things like Red Arena and some of these other tools that we're building that we want to be constantly updating based on we get signal from the community of like of them being able to jailbreak things. We want to incorporate that feedback as quickly as possible, and update models and so on. So we do take a full system level approach, but it's going to constantly evolve because these agents have a lot of ways and risks associated with them. They're not static things, but they can do a lot. So
Yeah, it's really cool, and agent is becoming more and more popular, and a lot of people are playing around with it. So, a question is like, have you been doing any interesting or useful cases using agent? For example, we are playing around with it. Like, you can use the agent to say, "Hey, subscribe me to HydroX AI in terms of the newsletters." Just send this out, and the model will do the planning, and we found our website and found where they can type in the email address and click on the subscribe, and they can subscribe by through one instruction. So any interesting use cases that I can share if you're playing around with it?
I mean, I think you're right. I think there's like I think the first wave of agents is really going to be stuff that you and I find annoying to do, like filling out forms and clicking on sites and putting my name and things. And I think that's like pretty useful. I think a few years ago we had like the restaurant reservation. I think Google tried that and it didn't quite work too well, where it would call and make reservations. Like I think we're going to start to give like these agents like more autonomy, and they're able to do stuff obviously with our approval and from input from us. So I do think like that's a pretty simple one. Like I would love to just be able to say like subscribe me to this podcast and like put them all on my phone and like and and or summarize them for me or do something, right, or transcribe them and summarize them, and that's pretty useful because I don't have a whole lot of time to listen to podcasts. I do think like in my opinion one of the killer apps for agents is data aggregation, especially for like knowledge workers. I think like there's people who like are for example, we do like a fair amount of like looking at the market and understanding like the state of the world in terms of things, and as we're exploring different strategies, or you can imagine things like the financial space where I want to basically I want to basically join a lot of disjoint like data sources and then condition things. Like LLMs are fantastic at that. I don't, they don't always like generate an accurate response, but like they're really great at like pulling data from I don't know, give me the last 5 Fed fund rate whatever changes cuts or raises. Look at trailing whatever the last 3 years of earnings for this company, and just like all you can imagine all like the things that you can condition the model on, and then have it make some recommendations on what to buy, what to invest in, and stuff like that. And you wouldn't take it as a human, like as an investor, like I wouldn't take it all without a grain of salt, but I would definitely like use that as great data to inform. Like it saves me so much time from looking up like 15 websites and like combing through like docs and all that. If it can do it all for me, and then I can apply my own, kind of analysis to things. Like that is such a useful thing. I mean, I still think coding is a great application. I think that's why we've gravitated towards it. And like coding assistant, I think coding assistant is one thing. I actually think coding review is actually one of the better applications. Like coding assistance is still viewed as a little bit risky because it's just generating code and
Right.
it's sometimes difficult to understand. Whereas like if I'm writing code and I ask it to give me a critique or a review, like I can actually learn a lot from that. And it's helpful for me as a human. I don't feel so much like it's doing all the work. It's actually accelerating me and making me better. So I like that application as well.
Cool, very cool, very cool. Thank you for all the great insights. And in the very end, so before we wrap up this interview, I would like to ask you just name one thing that you are most excited about, or one thing that you are most unsure about in this Gen AI wave or Gen AI's field.
Um, I was on a panel this week at the TED event on small models. I'm still pretty excited about small models. I think that, like as I mentioned, I think in that panel I was on with a bunch of folks. I think there's some folks think they're kind of they're not that useful. Um, I kind of predict a future where maybe we encode preferences in these small models and we don't even know it. So you can imagine we're not that far from being able to like train on device. I mean, the frameworks like PyTorch, you can I think like in the near future you're going to be able to do like just like back propagation like on your device and use like the accelerators and then start generating like a local fine-tuned model that encodes preferences for you and maybe personalization. I think that's so I think like small models actually are like I'm really pretty bullish on them. Also, just like I mean, obviously privacy and just like pragmatically, why would I send prompt rewriting all the way to the cloud to like 4.0 or 4 or 5e or something like that, or summarizing my encrypted messages, or I think there's like a ton of the really good use cases for small models, especially now they're actually getting really good. I think one thing I'm still unclear about like how I mean, everyone's talking about agents. I think companies have still struggled to figure out like how to deploy models, and like now we're talking about like orchestrating lots of components together, and like the ecosystem is quite thrashy and fragmented. And I'm hoping to help with some of the work I'm doing to help like bring the community together in some ways. So I'm a little bit unclear. Like I think we tend to get into a little bit of our own bubble and think like everything is like getting adopted and like it's like Gen AI is everywhere. But then when you kind of like poke outside of like big tech and like our own bubble here in Silicon Valley, you find out that companies they don't kind of have this like information is not it may be evenly distributed, but maybe not evenly understood or and like technical expertise in AI isn't like super prevalent everywhere. So I think we still have a long ways for like things to kind of even out. And I mean, I've kind of spent like the last decade of my career trying to democratize AI, right, through like tools and frameworks and like and building and doing research and open sourcing it, and now obviously most recently building Llama models and open sourcing those and trying to democratize the access to those. So we're still very far away from like everyone kind of being on the same level playing field. Um, but we're going to keep going, right? We're going to keep trying, and that's what things like the AI Alliance and like Meta kind of stand behind. So it's pretty exciting.
Cool, cool, very cool. Joe, time flies, and it was a great conversation with you today. And really, thank you again for your valuable insight and your participation.
Thank you, Zoe. That was super fun. Great talk.